What if the most privileged person you know suddenly lost everything they took for granted? If you've ever witnessed someone learning the hard truth about entitlement, this story is for you. And trust me, the transformation that follows will restore your faith in second chances. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's story about an underdog athlete might just change how you view determination forever. Manhattan's glittering skyline stretched beneath the penthouse windows of Thorne Tower, where Isabella Thorne's 21st birthday celebration unfolded in extravagant splendor. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across the gathering of New York's elite, fashion icons, tech moguls, and celebrities who'd flown in specifically for the event. At the center of it all stood Isabella, her designer gown catching the light as she laughed, surrounded by people eager to be in her orbit. From across the room, Harrison Thorne watched his daughter with a mixture of love and growing concern. At 53, Harrison had built Thorne Innovations from a small tech startup into a global empire valued at billions. He'd created revolutionary software, employed thousands, and changed how the world connected. Yet he couldn't seem to reach his only child. "She looks happy," remarked Catherine, Harrison's sister, joining him at the window. "She looks entitled," Harrison replied, his voice low to avoid being overheard. "That's the third time she's complained about the champagne not being the right vintage. The waitstaff are practically hiding from her." Catherine sighed. "She's young, Harrison. Young people can be self-absorbed." "It's more than that." Harrison watched as Isabella dismissively waved away a server who'd approached with hors d'oeuvres. "When was the last time you heard her say thank you to anyone? When was the last time she showed genuine interest in something beyond herself?" Before Catherine could answer, a commotion erupted near the DJ booth. Isabella's voice carried across the room, sharp and demanding. "I specifically requested Elton John for tonight. I don't care what his fee is." She gestured wildly, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Daddy promised me whatever I wanted for my 21st. Harrison moved through the crowd with practiced ease, reaching his daughter just as the party planner tried to explain that Sir Elton was currently performing in Australia. "Isabella," Harrison interjected calmly, "perhaps we can discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," Isabella replied, not bothering to lower her voice. "You said, and I quote, 'Anything you want for your birthday, princess. I want Elton John.'" Guests pretended not to stare, their discomfort palpable. Harrison gently took his daughter's elbow, leading her toward his private office off the main living area. Once inside, with the door closed against the pulsing music and curious eyes, he released her arm. "Isabella, you need to apologize to Margot. She's worked tirelessly to plan this evening." "Apologize?" Isabella scoffed, dropping onto the leather sofa. "For what? For expecting competence? For wanting what you promised me?" Harrison studied his daughter. Her perfect hair, her flawless makeup, the contemptuous set of her jaw. When had this happened? When had his bright-eyed little girl transformed into this person who viewed the world as something that existed solely to please her? "When your mother died," he began carefully, "I promised myself I'd give you everything. I never wanted you to feel the absence of her love." Isabella rolled her eyes. "Don't start with the dead mom guilt trip. I barely remember her anyway." The casual cruelty of her words struck Harrison like a physical blow. Elizabeth had fought so hard during those final months, determined to see their daughter's 5th birthday. The photo albums Isabella never looked and were filled with pictures of a woman growing increasingly frail, but whose smile never dimmed when holding her daughter. "That's enough," Harrison said, his voice quiet but firm. "Go enjoy your party. We'll discuss this tomorrow." "Whatever." Isabella stood, smoothing her dress. "Just make sure the cake is brought out at exactly midnight, with all 21 candles lit, and tell the DJ to play something decent." She swept from the room without a backward glance, leaving Harrison alone with the growing certainty that he had failed his daughter in the most fundamental way possible. The party continued into the early hours, Isabella at its center, accepting lavish gifts with the casual entitlement of someone who had never known want. Harrison circulated among his guests, the perfect host, despite the heaviness in his chest. By the time the last guest departed, dawn was threatening on the horizon, and Harrison had come to a decision. 3 days later, Isabella stormed into her father's home office, waving her platinum credit card. "It was declined," she announced, as if reporting a crime. "At Bergdorf's, in front of everyone. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" Harrison set aside the document he'd been reviewing. "I had your cards suspended?" Isabella stared at him, momentarily speechless. "You what? Why would you do that?" "Sit down, Isabella." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "We need to talk." "I don't have time for this. Melissa and I are flying to Paris this afternoon for Fashion Week. Just fix the card situation." "You're not going to Paris?" Harrison said simply. "Your passport has also been temporarily frozen." Isabella's perfect composure cracked. "You can't do that. I'm 21. An adult. An adult who lives in my home, drives my cars, spends my money, and has never worked a day in her life," Harrison responded calmly. "Please, sit down." Something in his tone finally penetrated her. Indignation. Isabella sank into the chair, her expression a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. "Isabella, I've made a terrible mistake with you," Harrison began. "When your mother died, I tried to fill the void with things. I thought if I could give you everything, you'd never feel the loss I felt. Instead, I've raised someone who values nothing." "That's not fair," Isabella protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "Last month your credit card charges exceeded $300,000, Harrison continued. "When I asked what you'd purchased, you couldn't remember half of it. So, on what? It's not like we can't afford it. That's not the point. The point is that you've lost perspective on what matters. You treat people as if they exist to serve you. You show no gratitude, no empathy, no awareness of your extraordinary privilege." Isabella crossed her arms, her jaw set stubbornly. "If this is about the party, it's about who you're becoming," Harrison interrupted, "and I refuse to watch my only child turn into someone who believes their wealth makes them superior or exempt from basic human decency." He opened his desk drawer and withdrew a thick envelope. "I've arranged something, a reset of sorts." "What kind of reset?" Isabella's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You're going to Montana. Tomorrow." "Montana?" She laughed incredulously. "Why would I go to Montana? There's nothing there but mountains and, I don't know, bears or whatever." "There's Clearwater Ranch," Harrison said. "A working cattle operation owned by the Callahan family. You'll be staying with them for 6 months. Isabella's laughter died abruptly. "This isn't funny, Dad." "It's not meant to be. I've known Jack Callahan for years. He supplies beef to our corporate retreats. He and his wife Grace have agreed to take you in. You'll work on their ranch, earning your keep like their own children do." "Work?" Isabella repeated the word as if it were in a foreign language. Like actual physical labor, with animals and dirt and... She couldn't even finish the sentence, her horror so complete. Yes, Harrison confirmed. You'll learn what it means to earn something, to care for creatures dependent on you, to be part of a community where everyone contributes. Isabella stood, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she paced. This is insane. I won't do it. You can't. Make me. You're right. I can't force you. You're an adult, as you pointed out. Harrison leaned back in his chair. But I can establish conditions for your continued financial support. 6 months at Clearwater Ranch, or you're entirely on your own. No money, no apartment, no connections. You'll make your own way with whatever skills you currently possess. The color drained from Isabella's face as she realized he was serious. You would cut me off? Your own daughter? I would save you, Harrison corrected gently. From the person you're becoming, from a life without meaning or purpose beyond consumption, from waking up at 40 and realizing you've never actually accomplished anything on your own merit. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes. Whether from fury or fear, Harrison couldn't tell. I hate you for this, she whispered. I can live with that. He replied steadily, if it means someday you might become someone you can respect. Isabella fled the office, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the photographs on the wall, including one of Elizabeth holding a newborn Isabella, her tired face radiant with a love that Harrison had never been able to fully replace, no matter how extravagant the substitute. The following morning, Harrison stood on the private airstrip, watching his daughter board the Thorne Innovations jet. She hadn't spoken a word to him since their confrontation, communicating only through Catherine, who thought the entire plan was excessive, but had nonetheless helped Isabella pack appropriate clothing for ranch life. Isabella paused at the top of the stairs, turning to give her father one last glacial stare before disappearing into the aircraft. Harrison remained until the jet was nothing but a speck against the cloudless blue sky, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or finally done something right as a parent. The flight to Montana was the longest 5 hours of Isabella's life. She'd refused the lunch prepared by the flight attendant, ignored the selection of films on the private jet's entertainment system, and rebuffed all attempts at conversation. Instead, she stared out the window as Manhattan's familiar skyline gave way to landscapes increasingly alien to her urban sensibilities. Her father had gone completely insane. That was the only explanation. Some kind of midlife crisis, perhaps, or delayed grief over her mother. Whatever the cause, Isabella was certain she could weather this absurd reset for a few days until Harrison came to his senses. He'd never been able to deny her anything for long. As the jet began its descent, Isabella got her first glimpse of Clearwater Ranch. Unlike the manicured estates of the Hamptons or the elegant vineyard retreats of Napa Valley, this was raw, working land that stretched toward distant mountains. Even from the air, she could see cattle dotting the landscape, tiny dark specks against green pastures. The private airstrip was little more than a cleared stretch of land with a small hangar. As Isabella descended the stairs, the first thing that struck her was the silence. No honking taxis, no constant hum of millions of people compressed into city blocks. Just wind and distant bird calls. A battered pickup truck was parked nearby, a tall man in a weathered cowboy hat leaning against it. As Isabella approached, wheeling her designer luggage behind her, he straightened up and removed his hat. Miss Thorne? Jack Callahan. His face was deeply tanned, etched with lines that spoke of years under the open sky. He extended a hand work-roughened and calloused. Isabella hesitated before offering her own manicured fingers in a brief, limp handshake. "Where's the car that's taking me to wherever I'm staying?" Jack gestured to the pickup. "You're looking at it." Isabella stared at the mud-spattered vehicle with undisguised horror. "You can't be serious. My luggage alone won't fit in that thing." "We'll manage," Jack replied, his tone neutral as he reached for her bags. He paused, eyebrows rising at the Louis Vuitton logo. "Your father mentioned you might have packed for a different kind of visit." "My father doesn't know anything about what I need," Isabella snapped. Jack loaded her luggage into the truck bed, securing it with practiced ease before opening the passenger door. "It's about an hour to the ranch. You might want to prepare yourself. We had some heavy rain yesterday, so the roads are a bit rough." Rough proved to be an understatement. The paved road quickly gave way to gravel, and then to little more than a dirt track that wound through rolling hills and stands of pine. Isabella clutched the door handle as the truck bounced and lurched, certain that her internal organs were being rearranged with each jolt. "So," Jack said, after nearly 20 minutes of silence, "Harrison tells me you've never been on a working ranch before." "I've been to the Hamptons," Isabella replied stiffly. "They have horses there." Jack's mouth twitched. "Clearwater's a bit different from what you're used to. We run about 500 head of cattle, plus the horses, some sheep, chickens. My wife Grace manages the organic vegetable operation. My daughter Emma handles most of the horse training, and my son Liam oversees the cattle with me." Isabella stared out the window, deliberately projecting disinterest. "How quaint." "It's honest work," Jack replied, seemingly unbothered by her attitude. "Been in my family for 4 generations. Not as fancy as what you're used to, but there's dignity in it." "I'm sure it's very rustic," Isabella murmured, the word clearly not a compliment. Jack fell silent again, allowing Isabella to retreat into her thoughts as they traveled deeper into the Montana wilderness. Through the windshield, she watched the landscape transform, grudgingly admitting to herself that it possessed a wild beauty unlike anything in her urban experience. The sky seemed impossibly vast, stretching from horizon to horizon in a blue so intense it almost hurt to look at. As they crested a final hill, Clearwater Ranch came into view. A cluster of buildings nestled in a valley, surrounded by pastures and backed by a dense forest. A river, presumably the Clearwater that gave the ranch its name, wound through the property like a silver ribbon. "Home," Jack said simply, guiding the truck down the long drive toward the main house. It wasn't what Isabella had expected. She'd imagined some primitive log cabin with an outhouse. Instead, the main house was a substantial 2-story structure of weathered wood and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Several outbuildings surrounded it: a large barn, stables, what appeared to be workshops or storage. Not luxurious by her standards, certainly, but not the primitive hovel she'd feared. As Jack parked in front of the house, the front door opened. A woman emerged, wiping her hands on an apron, her graying hair pulled back in a simple braid. She was followed by 2 younger people, a man and woman in their mid-20s, both tall like their father, both watching Isabella with undisguised curiosity. "Welcome to Clearwater," the older woman said as Isabella reluctantly exited the truck. "I'm Grace Callahan. These are our children, Emma and Liam." Emma nodded politely. though her eyes held a hint of skepticism as she took in Isabella's inappropriate footwear and designer jeans. Liam merely tipped his hat, his expression unreadable. "Let's get you settled," Grace continued, gesturing toward the house. "You must be tired after your journey." Isabella followed silently, acutely aware of the dirt, already clinging to her shoes and the way the wind was destroying her carefully styled hair. Inside, the house was surprisingly spacious, with high ceilings and large windows that captured the stunning views. The furnishings were simple but solid: handcrafted wooden tables, comfortable-looking sofas, bookshelves filled with well-worn volumes. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right," Grace explained, leading the way. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall. You'll be sharing with Emma." "Sharing?" Isabella couldn't keep the horror from her voice. Grace paused on the stairs, turning to look at Isabella directly. "Yes, sharing. We have indoor plumbing and hot water, if that's your concern, though it's not unlimited. Quick showers are appreciated." Isabella's room was modest by any standard, let alone hers. A twin bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser, a small desk beneath a window overlooking the ranch, and a closet that she immediately realized wouldn't hold even a tenth of her wardrobe. "I'll bring up your bags," Jack offered from the doorway. "There. Must be some mistake," Isabella said, turning in a slow circle. "Where's the rest of it?" "The rest of what, dear?" Grace asked. "The rest of my space, my accommodations." Isabella gestured around the small room. "This can't be all of it." Jack and Grace exchanged a glance that Isabella couldn't interpret. "This is what we have to offer," Grace said gently. "It's the same size as Emma's room." "But Isabella stopped herself just short of saying rich or important or any of the other words that would normally guarantee her preferential treatment. "You're our guest," Grace finished for her, "and we're happy to have you. Dinner's at 6. That gives you about an hour to freshen up and unpack what you need for tonight. We can sort out the rest of your things tomorrow." With that, they left her alone with her thoughts and her increasingly uncertain future. Dinner was a culture shock, unlike anything Isabella had experienced. The family gathered around a large wooden table, food served family-style in mismatched dishes that bore no resemblance to the fine china she was accustomed to. The meal itself was surprisingly good: roast chicken, vegetables fresh from Grace's garden, homemade bread still warm from the oven, but the ritual surrounding it felt alien. Jack said a brief grace, thanking God for the food and the hands that prepared it. Then dishes were passed, portions taken, conversations flowing naturally around subjects Isabella could barely comprehend. Cattle prices, irrigation issues, a horse named Thunderbolt with a mysterious limp. "So, Isabella," Emma said during a lull, "Dad says you're from New York City." Isabella nodded, picking at her food. "Manhattan, Upper East Side." "I visited New York once," Liam volunteered. "Too many people, not enough sky for my taste." "It's the greatest city in the world," Isabella replied defensively. "Different worlds for different folks," Jack said diplomatically. "Isabella, your father mentioned you attended NYU?" "For a while," she shrugged. "I took a break." What she didn't add was that the break had come after 3 semesters of barely passing grades and complaints from professors about her spotty attendance and entitled attitude. "What were you studying?" Grace asked. Isabella pushed a carrot around her plate. "Liberal arts. I hadn't decided on a major." "Emma studied agricultural science at Montana State," Grace said proudly. "And Liam did 2 years at the Community College for Business Management before deciding the ranch was where he belonged." "How fascinating," Isabella murmured. the words dripping with insincerity. An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only by the clink of silverware against plates. "Well," Jack finally said, "we should discuss tomorrow. Isabella, ranch life starts early. Breakfast is at 5. "In the morning?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, earning a poorly concealed smirk from Liam. "Yes, in the morning," Jack confirmed. "After breakfast, Emma will get you set up with appropriate work clothes and boots, and then you'll shadow her for the day to get a feel for how things operate around here." "I didn't come here to shadow anyone," Isabella protested. "My father can't possibly expect me to actually work like some kind of cowhand," Liam suggested, his voice neutral but his eyes challenging. "Person of normal means," Isabella finished lamely. Jack set down his fork, his expression serious. "Isabella, I've known your father for many years. He's a good man who's built something remarkable. He's also worried about you, not as an heir to his fortune, but as his daughter. He believes you need this experience, and I respect him enough to help provide it. But this isn't a resort, and we're not your staff. Everyone at Clearwater contributes." Isabella looked around the table, finding the same steady resolve in each face. These people weren't intimidated by her wealth or her family name. Here, those things meant nothing. "Fine," she said finally, "but I'm not getting up at 5. She did, in fact, get up at 5, or rather she was woken at 5 by Emma, who entered her room without knocking and flipped on the light. "Rise and shine, city." "Girl," Emma announced cheerfully, "cows don't milk themselves." Isabella groaned, pulling the quilt over her head. "Go away." The quilt was promptly yanked off. "Not happening. You've got 10 minutes to get dressed and downstairs. Mum's making flapjacks, and they're worth getting up for." 9 minutes later, Isabella stumbled into the kitchen, her hair unbrushed, wearing the silk pajamas she'd slept in. The Callahans were already seated around the table, all fully dressed and looking frustratingly alert. "Good morning," Grace greeted her, setting a plate of pancakes on the table. "Coffee?" "God, yes," Isabella mumbled, sinking into an empty chair. Breakfast was a blur of food passing, conversations about the day's tasks, and the gradual realization that everyone at the table except her had been awake for at least an hour already. Jack and Liam discussed moving cattle to a different pasture. Grace mentioned harvesting vegetables for a farmer's market, and Emma outlined a training session with a new horse. "After breakfast, we'll get you set up with some proper clothes," Emma told Isabella. Those pajamas would be destroyed before lunch. In Emma's room, Isabella stared in horror at the clothing options presented to her. Worn jeans, flannel shirts, sturdy boots that had clearly seen better days. "These are used," she said, unable to keep the distaste from her voice. "Yes, they're used. By me," Emma replied evenly. "We don't waste perfectly good clothing just because it's not brand new. These will fit you well enough until we can get to town for some things of your own." Reluctantly, Isabella changed into the borrowed clothes, grimacing at her reflection in Emma's small mirror. The jeans were slightly too large, secured with a belt, and the flannel shirt swamped her slender frame. The boots, at least, fit reasonably well with thick socks. "You look fine," Emma assured her, though the amusement in her eyes suggested otherwise. "Now, let's go. We're already behind schedule." The next several hours were a whirlwind of unfamiliar activities. Emma took her on a tour of the ranch, explaining operations as they went. The stables housed a dozen horses, each with its own personality and purpose, according to Emma. The barn contained equipment Isabella couldn't begin to identify. The vegetable garden stretched in neat rows behind the house, where Grace worked, with 2 local women harvesting produce. "And this," Emma said, leading Isabella to a fenced enclosure near the barn, "is where you'll start." Inside the pen were 6 calves, their large eyes regarding the newcomers with mild interest. "What am I supposed to do with them?" Isabella asked warily. "Feed them," Emma replied, gesturing to a stack of bottles filled with milk. "They're orphans, or from mothers who can't produce enough milk. They need to be bottle-fed twice daily." Isabella stared at the calves, then at the bottles. "You can't be serious." "Entirely serious," Emma demonstrated, calling one of the calves, which trotted over eagerly. She showed Isabella how to hold the bottle at the correct angle, how to make sure the calf was getting enough without gulping too quickly. "Now you try," Emma said, handing Isabella a bottle. The smallest calf approached, eyeing Isabella with what she could have sworn was skepticism. She held out the bottle awkwardly, jumping when the calf butted against her hand impatiently. "He's not going to hurt you," Emma assured her. "Just hold. Steady." Isabella tentatively offered the bottle again. This time the calf latched on, sucking vigorously. The sensation was strange. The pull against the bottle, the calf's warm breath on her hand, the surprising strength in the young animal's movements. "There you go," Emma encouraged. "See? Not so bad." To Isabella's own surprise, it wasn't bad at all. There was something oddly satisfying about the calf's eager feeding, its complete focus on her and the nourishment she provided. When the bottle was empty, the calf lingered, nudging her hand as if checking for more. "He likes you," Emma observed. "That's Jasper. He's the runt of his litter, but he's a fighter." Isabella found herself reaching out to touch the calf's head, its coat surprisingly soft beneath her fingers. "He's smaller than the others." "Being small doesn't mean being weak," Emma replied. "Jasper makes up for his size with determination. Now we've got 5 more hungry calves to feed." By the time all the calves were fed, Isabella's arms ached from holding bottles, and her borrowed jeans were smudged with dirt, and what she desperately hoped was just mud. Emma, annoyingly, looked as fresh as she had at breakfast. "Not bad for your first morning," Emma conceded as they left the pen. "Now we need to muck out the stables." "Muck out?" Isabella repeated, the unfamiliar phrase concerning her. "Clean out. The stalls. Remove the soiled hay and horse manure. Put down fresh bedding." Isabella stopped walking. "I am not touching horse manure." Emma turned, her patience visibly thinning. "Yes, you are. Every person on this ranch does their share, including mucking stalls. It's not pleasant, but it's necessary, and it builds character." "I have plenty of character," Isabella snapped. "Do you?" Emma's challenge was direct. "Your father sent you here because he thinks otherwise. Prove him wrong. Show me, show all of us, that Isabella Thorne isn't afraid of a little honest work, even when it's dirty." They stared at each other. 2 young women from worlds so different they might as well have been different planets. Emma, confident in her place and purpose. Isabella, stripped of every advantage she'd relied on her entire life. "Fine," Isabella finally said. "Show me what to do." The stable work was every bit as disgusting as Isabella had feared. By lunchtime she was filthy, exhausted, and developing blisters despite the thick socks in Emma's boots. Her manicured nails were already chipped, her carefully maintained hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail that did nothing to keep wisps from sticking to her sweaty forehead. The family gathered for a simple lunch of sandwiches and cold lemonade. Isabella collapsed into a chair, too tired even to complain about the basic fare. "How's our city girl doing?" Liam asked, his tone somewhere between teasing and genuine curiosity. "She fed the orphan calves without fainting," Emma reported, "and managed half the stable mucking before I took pity on her." "Impressive," Jack said, and to Isabella's surprise, he seemed to mean it. "First days are always the hardest. It gets easier." "I don't see how," Isabella muttered, wincing as she flexed her sore hands. "Your muscles adjust," Grace explained kindly. "Your body gets used to the work. Before long, you'll be doing twice as much with half the effort." "I don't want to do twice as much," Isabella said. "I don't want to do any of this. I don't belong here." "Where do you belong, then?" The question came from Liam, his expression genuinely curious. "What would you be doing in New York right now if your father hadn't sent you here?" The question caught Isabella off guard. What would she be doing? Shopping, probably, or having lunch with friends at an overpriced restaurant where they'd pick at their food and gossip about people they claimed to like, maybe planning her next vacation or party or shopping spree. "Something important," she said finally, but the words rang hollow even to her own ears. "Well," Jack said, breaking the uncomfortable silence that followed, "this afternoon you'll be helping Grace in the garden. The farmer's market is tomorrow and we've got a lot of harvesting to do." "Great," Isabella muttered. "More dirt." After lunch, Grace led Isabella to the vegetable gardens, where neat rows of produce stretched toward a distant fence. Two women were already working there, filling baskets with tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers. "Maria and Helen help with the garden 3 days a week," Grace explained. "They're sisters from town. Maria's husband works with Jack and Liam on the cattle operation." The women nodded politely to Isabella, their expressions curious but not unfriendly. Grace showed Isabella how to harvest tomatoes, checking for ripeness, handling the fruit gently to avoid bruising. "We're organic certified," Grace explained as they worked. "No chemical pesticides or fertilizers. It's harder in some ways, but the produce tastes better and sells at a premium at the farmer's market." Despite herself, Isabella found the work oddly soothing. The repetitive motion of picking tomatoes, the warm sunshine on her back, the earthy scent of the garden. It was also different from anything in her experience. Her mind, usually racing with social calculations or shopping plans, gradually quieted. "These tomatoes are actually good," Isabella remarked with surprise, biting into one Grace had offered her. The flavor burst across her tongue, sweet, tangy, and nothing like the bland version she'd picked at in Manhattan restaurants. "That's what real food tastes like," Grace said with a smile. "Grown in good soil, picked at the perfect moment, eaten fresh. No shipping it across the country, no gases to force ripening." Isabella took another bite, juice running down her chin. She wiped it away with the back of her hand without thinking, a casual gesture that would have horrified her just days ago. "We'll be bringing all this to the Riverbend Farmers Market tomorrow," Grace continued, gesturing to their growing harvest. "It's how we sell most of our produce. The community knows Clearwater vegetables are the best in the county." By the time the sun began to set, Isabella's back ached. Her hands were stained with soil and tomato juice, and she'd filled more baskets than she could count. Yet there was an unfamiliar feeling beneath the exhaustion, a sense of accomplishment, of having contributed something tangible. At dinner that night, Isabella found herself too tired to maintain her usual wall of disdain. She ate the hearty stew Grace had prepared with genuine appetite, her body demanding fuel after the day's exertions. Early night for you, I imagine, Jack observed as they finished the meal. First days on the ranch tend to wear folks out. Isabella nodded, stifling a yawn. What time do we leave for this farmer's market tomorrow? 5:30, Grace replied. It's about an hour's drive to Riverbend, and we need to set up before the market opens at 8. Any protest Isabella might have made was swallowed by another yawn. She excused herself shortly after, climbing the stairs with leaden legs. She barely managed to shower before collapsing onto the narrow bed, asleep almost instantly. Morning came. Too soon, Emma's knock jolting her from a dreamless sleep. Isabella dressed in another borrowed outfit, moving mechanically through the pre-dawn kitchen routine that was already becoming familiar, despite her resistance. The truck's cargo bed was loaded with vegetables, each variety carefully sorted and arranged in wooden crates. Grace drove, with Isabella in the passenger seat and Emma in the back, securing the precious cargo as they bounced along rural roads. Riverbend was larger than Isabella had expected. Not a city by any measure, but a proper town with a main street lined with small businesses. The farmers' market occupied a tree-shaded park in the center, where vendors were already setting up tables and tents. The Clearwater stand was clearly popular. Several regular customers stopped by while they were still arranging their display, inquiring about specific vegetables or exchanging friendly conversation with Grace. Isabella found herself pressed into service, arranging tomatoes by variety, stacking peppers by color, and learning the prices of each item. "You'll handle sales," Grace informed her, setting up a cash box on a small table. "It's good practice for dealing with customers." "Me?" Isabella stared at the simple cash box. "I don't know how to. I've never worked a register or anything." "It's addition and subtraction," Emma said with a shrug. "I'm sure your expensive education covered that much." Before Isabella could respond, their first customer approached, and she was thrust into the unfamiliar role of salesperson. To her surprise, it wasn't entirely awful. The customers were generally pleasant, many complimenting the quality of Clearwater's produce. The math was indeed simple, though she fumbled with making change at first. As the morning progressed, Isabella settled into a rhythm. Grace and Emma, harvested the previous day, had quickly becoming the most popular items at the market. A quiet pride crept over Isabella as she watched people select tomatoes she had personally picked, vegetables she had helped bring to market. "You're doing well," Grace commented during a brief lull. "You have a natural way with people when you try." Isabella blinked at the unexpected compliment. "I do." "You're your father's daughter in that respect," Grace said. "Harrison has always had a gift for making people feel valued. It's part of what makes him such a successful businessman." The comparison to her father stirred complicated feelings. Isabella had always viewed Harrison's business acumen as separate from her own identity, something she would eventually inherit rather than emulate. "Did you know my mother too?" she asked suddenly. Grace's expression softened. "Yes, I met Elizabeth a few times when she and Harrison came to Montana. She was lovely, kind, intelligent, with a genuine interest in people. She asked thoughtful questions about our ranch, our community. She seemed to truly see the people around her." Isabella absorbed this information quietly. Her memories of her mother were hazy at best, more impressions than actual recollections. A soft voice, a gentle hand, the scent of a particular perfume. Her father rarely spoke of Elizabeth, the pain of her loss still evident even decades later. "You have her smile," Grace added. When you forget to be guarded, I see her in you. Isabella didn't know how to respond to that, so she busied herself rearranging an already perfect display of bell peppers. Thankfully, a new wave of customers arrived, saving her from having to acknowledge the unexpected emotion tightening her throat. By early afternoon, they had sold nearly everything. The few remaining items were packed away, the cash box counted and secured, and the Clearwater stand dismantled with practiced efficiency. We did well today, Grace announced as they loaded the truck. One of our best markets this season, because of the tomatoes, Emma added. The ones you helped harvest, Isabella. People were specifically asking for them. Despite herself, Isabella felt a flush of pride. She had contributed to this success, however marginally. It was a novel sensation, accomplishment based not on her family name or wealth, but on actual effort. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, all three women tired from the early start and busy market day. Isabella found herself gazing out the window, taking in the dramatic landscape of mountains and valleys with new eyes. There was a rugged beauty to Montana that she was reluctantly beginning to appreciate. At the ranch, they were met with unexpected news. One of the pregnant mares had gone into labor earlier than anticipated, and Jack, Liam, and the ranch veterinarian were in the stables monitoring the situation. First foal of the season, Emma explained, her fatigue forgotten as she hurried toward the stables. Come on, you shouldn't miss this. Isabella followed hesitantly. Her experience with horses was limited to a few riding lessons at an exclusive club in the Hamptons, where pristine animals were presented already groomed and saddled. Birth seemed like a messy process she'd rather avoid. The stable was warm and filled with the pungent scents of hay and horses. In one of the larger stalls, a chestnut mare lay on her sides heaving with exertion. Jack knelt near her head, stroking her neck and murmuring reassurances. Liam and a middle-aged woman Isabella assumed was the veterinarian positioned themselves at the other end, monitoring progress. "How's she doing?" Emma asked, slipping into the stall. "Almost there," the vet replied. "It's been a textbook labor so far." Isabella hung back, uncertain of her place in this intimate scene. Part of her wanted to retreat to the house, away from the rawness of what was unfolding, yet something kept her rooted to the spot, a reluctant fascination with this most fundamental aspect of life. "You can come closer," Jack invited, noticing her hesitation. "Maple's one of our gentlest mares. She won't mind." Cautiously, Isabella stepped into the stall, keeping a respectful distance. The mare's deep brown eyes seemed to register her presence, but the animal was too focused on her labor to show concern about the stranger. "Talk to her," Jack suggested. "Horses find human voices soothing during difficult moments." "What would I say?" Isabella whispered. "Anything kind," Jack replied simply. Feeling foolish but compelled to participate, Isabella knelt down near the mare's head, opposite Jack. "You're doing great, Maple," she said softly. "Everyone's here to help you. You're not alone." The words felt strange on her tongue, words of encouragement she'd rarely offered to anyone, let alone an animal. Yet Maple's ears twitched toward her voice, and some of the tension seemed to ease from the horse's powerful neck. "It's happening," the vet announced. "Everyone stay calm and quiet." What followed was both primal and miraculous. Isabella found herself holding her breath as the foal emerged, first tiny hooves, then a nose, and finally the entire body in a rush of motion. The newborn was slick with fluid, impossibly delicate, yet perfectly formed. "It's a filly," Liam said, his usual reserve replaced by genuine wonder, "and she looks healthy." Isabella watched, transfixed, as Maple struggled to her feet and began the process of cleaning her newborn. The foal, all spindly legs and oversized ears, made valiant efforts to stand, falling repeatedly before finally maintaining a wobbly balance. "First steps," Emma murmured beside her, "always my favorite part." The foal took those first tentative steps toward her mother, instinct guiding her to nourishment and security. The mare nickered softly, a sound of such pure maternal recognition that Isabella felt an unexpected sting of tears. "What will you name her?" the vet asked as she packed up her equipment, the birth having proceeded without complications. "Usually Emma handles the naming," Jack said, looking at his daughter. Emma studied the foal thoughtfully. "Oh, what do you think, Isabella? Want to suggest a name?" Startled by the invitation, Isabella looked at the newborn more carefully. The filly's coat was dark with dampness, but showed signs of the rich chestnut she would inherit from her mother. Her legs were marked with splashes of white, giving her a distinctive appearance. "Serene," Isabella suggested after a moment. "It means star in Welsh, because of the white mark on her forehead. It looks like a star." There was a brief silence as the Callahans considered the name. "Serene," Emma repeated, testing the sound. "I like it. Unusual but graceful. Serene it is." A strange warmth spread through Isabella's chest. Her suggestion, her contribution, had been accepted without question. Serene would grow up on this ranch, becoming part of its heritage, bearing a name Isabella had chosen. As they left the stables, allowing mother and foal time to bond in peace, Isabella found herself walking alongside Jack. "That was amazing," she admitted, the cynical facade she typically maintained momentarily forgotten. Jack nodded. "Never gets old, witnessing new life. No matter how many foals I've seen born, each one feels like a miracle." "Thank you," Isabella said impulsively, "for letting me be part of it." Jack studied her with his steady gaze. "You know, Isabella, being part of things, really part of them, not just observing from a distance, that's what gives life meaning. Your father understands that. It's why he built his company from nothing instead of living off family money. It's why he sent you here." Isabella had no ready response to that, and they walked the rest of the way to the house in thoughtful silence. That evening, Isabella surprised herself by volunteering to help Grace with dinner preparations. Her culinary skills were non-existent. In New York, food appeared either from restaurants or prepared by staff, but Grace patiently showed her how to chop vegetables for a salad, explaining knife techniques with the same seriousness she might have used to discuss stock portfolios. "Not bad for a first attempt," Grace commented, inspecting Isabella's somewhat uneven vegetable chunks. "Cooking is like any other skill. It improves with practice." "My father can't cook either," Isabella said, realizing as she spoke that she knew surprisingly little about Harrison's domestic capabilities. "At least, I don't think he can. We always had a chef." "Actually, Harrison is quite competent in the kitchen," Grace corrected her. "When he visits the ranch, he often cooks breakfast for everyone, says it reminds him of his college days before he became successful." This revelation caught Isabella off guard. The image of her powerful father standing over a stove, preparing food with his own hands, didn't align with the Harrison Thorne she knew, or thought she knew. "There's a lot about your father you might not be aware of," Grace continued, as if reading her thoughts. "He worked his way through college, did you know that? Scholarships covered tuition, but he worked nights as a security guard to pay for his room and board. Isabella shook her head mutely. Her father's journey from ordinary beginnings to billionaire status was part of the Thorne mythology, but she'd never considered the practical realities of that transition, the actual work involved, the sacrifices made. He values what he's built because he knows what it costs to build something, Grace said, turning her attention to the roasting pan she was preparing. Not just in money, but in effort, in time, in dedication. The conversation lingered in Isabella's mind through dinner and into the evening. As she sat on the porch afterward, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple, she found herself contemplating her own life with uncomfortable clarity. What had she built? What had she contributed? Who would she be without her father's name and fortune? The questions were disturbing, offering no easy answers. For 21 years, she had defined herself primarily through consumption. The clothes she wore, the places she visited, the exclusive circles she moved in. Without those external markers, who was Isabella Thorne? Days at Clearwater Ranch settled into a routine that, despite Isabella's initial resistance, began to feel almost natural. Each morning brought new tasks: feeding animals, mucking stalls, harvesting vegetables, mending fences. The physical labor that had initially seemed so daunting gradually became manageable as her body adapted, developing strength and resilience she hadn't known it possessed. Her hands, once perfectly manicured, and soft, developed calluses, her skin tanned from hours outdoors. Her designer clothes remained packed away, replaced by practical jeans and work shirts that grew more comfortable with each wearing. 2 weeks into her stay, Emma invited her to join the morning ride, a daily inspection of the ranch's perimeter that served both practical and recreational purposes. Isabella hesitated, her limited riding experience making her nervous. "You can ride Buttercup," Emma offered. "She's gentle and patient, perfect for beginners." Buttercup proved to be a placid mare with a golden coat and a calm disposition. Under Emma's guidance, Isabella learned the basics of Western riding, different from the English style she'd briefly attempted in the Hamptons. The morning rides quickly became Isabella's favorite part of ranch life. There was something indescribably freeing about moving across the vast landscape on horseback, the rhythm of Buttercup's gait becoming as familiar as her own heartbeat. Montana stretched before her in all directions: mountains, valleys, forests, streams, a world so much larger and more magnificent than the concrete confines of Manhattan. "You're getting better," Emma commented one morning, as they paused to let their horses drink from a clear stream. "Your posture's improving. You're starting to move with Buttercup instead of fighting her rhythm." "She's a good teacher," Isabella replied, patting the mare's neck affectionately. Over the past weeks, she'd developed a genuine bond with the gentle horse, finding unexpected comfort in the animal's steady presence and uncomplicated trust. "Most animals are," Emma agreed. "They don't care who your father is or how much money you have. They respond to how you treat them, to your energy, your intentions." Isabella considered this as they continued their ride, following a trail that wound through a stand of aspen trees. The simple truth of Emma's observation resonated with her. At Clearwater, she was judged solely on her actions, not her name or wealth or social connections. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. As they emerged from the trees onto a ridge overlooking the ranch, Emma reined her horse to a stop. Beautiful, isn't it? Below them, clear water sprawled across the valley. The main house, the barn, the stables, the neat rows of Grace's gardens. Beyond it, pastures where cattle grazed and the silver ribbon of the river that gave the ranch its name. In the distance, snow-capped mountains formed a majestic backdrop. Yes, Isabella admitted, surprised by the depth of emotion the view evoked. It really is. My great-grandfather homesteaded this land, Emma said, her voice carrying a hint of pride. Arrived with nothing but determination and a dream. 4 generations of Callahans have poured their lives into these acres, preserving it, improving it, sustaining it. Isabella thought of her father's company, built from an idea in a college dorm room to a global enterprise, employing thousands. Different in scale and nature, perhaps, but born of the same human drive to create something of value. Your father understands legacy, Emma continued, as if following Isabella's train of thought. That's why he's concerned about yours. Isabella bristled slightly. He's concerned about controlling me. Is he? Emma turned in her saddle, fixing Isabella with a direct gaze. Or is he worried about what happens when someone inherits wealth they haven't earned and responsibility they don't understand? The question hit uncomfortably close to home. Isabella shifted her weight, causing Buttercup to snort and sidestep. I didn't ask to be born rich, she said defensively. No one asks for the circumstances of their birth, Emma replied evenly. But everyone gets to decide what to do with them. Before Isabella could respond, a rumble of thunder cut through the clear morning air. Dark clouds had gathered over the mountains with surprising speed, a stark reminder of how quickly weather could change in this part of Montana. We need to get back, Emma said, turning her horse toward the ranch. That storm's moving fast. They rode quickly, but the storm moved faster. The first heavy drops began to fall when they were still a mile from the ranch, quickly becoming a downpour that soaked them to the skin despite their rain gear. Lightning flashed across the darkened sky, followed almost immediately by deafening thunder. Buttercup, normally so steady, grew skittish with each thunderclap. Isabella struggled to maintain control, her limited riding experience inadequate for the situation. Emma's horse was similarly agitated, though she handled him with practiced skill. Nearly there, Emma called over the roar of the storm. Just stay calm and keep her headed toward home. A particularly violent lightning strike illuminated the landscape in stark relief, followed by thunder so loud Isabella felt it in her chest. Buttercup reared in panic, her front hooves pawing at the air. Isabella, unprepared for the sudden movement, lost her grip on the reins and tumbled backward off the horse. She hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. For a terrifying moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only watch as Buttercup bolted away across the rain-soaked field. Isabella! Emma's voice seemed distant through the pounding rain. Moments later, she was kneeling beside her, face tight with concern. Are you hurt? Can you move? Isabella managed a shallow breath, then another. Gradually, her lungs remembered their function. I'm okay, she gasped, though the shooting pain in her left ankle suggested otherwise. Just winded. Emma helped her. Sit up, checking for obvious injuries. Your ankle's swelling. Probably a sprain, maybe worse. Buttercup, she'll head for the stables, Emma assured her. Horses know where they're fed. We need to get you out of this storm. With Emma's support, Isabella managed to stand, careful to keep weight off her injured ankle. Walking was clearly impossible, and they were still at least half a mile from the ranch. "You'll have to ride with me," Emma decided, leading her horse. "Closer. I'll help you up." Getting onto the horse with one functioning ankle required ingenuity and determination. Emma essentially lifted Isabella into the saddle, then mounted behind her, reaching around to take the reins. "Hold on," she instructed, urging the horse forward through the downpour. Isabella had never felt more vulnerable or more grateful for another person's competence. Emma guided the horse with quiet confidence, navigating the rain-slicked terrain with an ease born of experience. By the time they reached the ranch, the storm was easing, though the damage was evident. Tree branches littered the driveway, and one of the smaller outbuildings had lost part of its roof. Buttercup, as Emma had predicted, had returned safely to the stables, where Liam was already drying her off. Word of Isabella's accident spread quickly. Before they dismounted, Jack emerged from the barn, his expression concerned as he helped Isabella down and assessed her injury. "Let's get that ankle looked at," he said, scooping her up as easily as if she were a child. Isabella was too exhausted and in too much pain to protest being carried. Inside the house, Grace had already prepared the living room sofa with towels and a first aid kit. She helped Isabella change into dry clothes, then examined the swollen ankle with gentle, practiced hands. "It's a sprain," she pronounced after. Careful probing. Painful but not broken. Ice, elevation and rest for a few days. "I'm sorry," Isabella said, as Grace wrapped the ankle in a supportive bandage. "I should have controlled Buttercup better." "Horses outweigh us by 1,000 pounds, Grace replied matter-of-factly. "No amount of skill guarantees complete control, especially in a thunderstorm. Emma said you stayed remarkably calm throughout." Isabella blinked, surprised by both the assessment and the fact that it mattered to her. "Really?" "Really," Emma confirmed, entering the room with mugs of steaming tea. "Most beginners would have panicked completely. You kept your head until Buttercup lost hers. This small validation, earned rather than automatically granted due to her status, felt surprisingly significant." Isabella accepted the tea gratefully, allowing its warmth to seep into her still chilled body. The next few days of enforced inactivity were challenging. Isabella, now accustomed to physical labor and constant movement, found herself confined to the house, her mobility limited by her injured ankle. Grace provided a steady stream of books from the family's extensive library, novels, historical accounts, guides to ranching and agriculture. To Isabella's surprise, she found herself absorbed in these volumes, particularly the histories of frontier women who had helped settle this harsh but beautiful land. She also discovered an unexpected talent for food preparation. With Grace's patient guidance, Isabella learned to bake bread, prepare simple soups, and even attempt more complex dishes. There was something deeply satisfying about creating food from basic ingredients, a tangible accomplishment that resulted in immediate enjoyment. "Your apple pie is getting better," Liam commented after dinner one evening, helping himself to a second slice. "Crust is flakier this time." Coming from the usually reserved Liam, this was high praise indeed. Isabella felt a disproportionate sense of pride in the simple dessert, more satisfaction than she'd ever derived from purchasing designer handbags or securing reservations at exclusive restaurants. "It's all in the handling of the dough," she explained, echoing Grace's instructions. "Too much and it gets tough, too little and it falls apart." "Sounds like people," Jack observed from his armchair, where he was reviewing cattle records. Finding that balance between too much handling and not enough, that's the trick to most relationships. The observation struck Isabella as unexpectedly profound. Her father had alternated between lavish indulgence and emotional distance, never quite finding the middle ground that might have better served them both. A week after her fall, Isabella's ankle had healed enough for light activity. With a supportive wrap and a borrowed cane, she made her first visit to the stables since the accident. Buttercup greeted her with a soft nickering sound, extending her velvety nose over the stall door. "She remembers you," Liam commented, pausing in his work of replacing a broken hinge. "Horses don't forget people who've been kind to them." Isabella offered the mare an apple, smiling as Buttercup's lips tickled her palm. "I was worried she might be traumatized by what happened." "Animals live in the present more than we do," Liam replied, returning to his repair work. "They don't dwell on past troubles or worry about future ones. There's a lesson in that, if you're inclined to take it." Isabella was finding that many lessons were embedded in ranch life, often delivered in the Callahans' characteristically understated manner. They taught by example rather than lecture, allowing her to discover truths at her own pace through direct experience. As her ankle continued to heal, Isabella gradually resumed her duties around the ranch, though the family insisted she avoid anything too strenuous. She found herself spending more time with Grace in the kitchen and gardens, learning skills her privileged upbringing had never required. One afternoon, as they worked side by side preserving tomatoes from the garden, Grace broached a subject Isabella had been carefully avoiding. "Have you spoken with your father since you arrived?" Isabella focused intently on the jar she was filling. "No. He calls every week, you know. Checks on your progress." This revelation sent an unexpected pang through Isabella's chest. "What do you tell him?" "The truth," Grace replied simply, "and that you're working hard, learning quickly, and showing a resilience he'd be proud of." The jar in Isabella's hand suddenly felt heavier. He wouldn't care about any of that. Grace set down her ladle, giving Isabella her full attention. "Is that really what you believe? That your father doesn't care about who you're becoming, only about controlling your behavior?" Put so bluntly, the assumption seemed childish, even to Isabella's own ears. "I don't know what he cares about," she admitted finally. "We've never really talked about anything important." "Perhaps that's something worth changing," Grace suggested gently. Later that evening, Isabella sat on the porch swing, watching twilight settle over the ranch. The air was cooling as summer edged toward fall, bringing a crispness that hinted at changes to come. A month had passed since her arrival at Clearwater, a month that had altered her in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. Her phone had remained packed away since her arrival, a deliberate separation from her former life. Now she retrieved it from her suitcase, powered it on, and scrolled to her father's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button for several long moments before she finally pressed it. The phone rang 3 times before Harrison answered, his voice cautious. "Isabella? Hi, Dad." The familiar address felt strange on her tongue, more intimate than their typical interactions warranted, yet suddenly important. "Are you all right?" Concern threaded through his question. "Has something happened?" "I'm fine," she assured him quickly. "I just thought I should call to check in." There was a brief silence, filled with the weight of their complicated relationship. "I'm glad you did," Harrison said finally. I've been wondering how you're finding ranch life." Isabella considered the question, searching for an honest answer, beyond the reflexive complaints that would once have come automatically. "It's hard," she acknowledged, "physically demanding in ways I never imagined, but also rewarding, I guess. There's a satisfaction in the work that I didn't expect." "Jack mentioned you named a foal," Harrison said, and Isabella was surprised to detect a note of pride in his voice. "Serene, was it? You know about that?" "I know quite a bit about how you're doing," Harrison admitted, "but it's good to hear it directly from you." The conversation that followed was unlike any they'd had before. Isabella found herself describing her experiences, the farmer's market, her rides with Emma, her growing skill in the kitchen, even her fall from Buttercup. Harrison listened attentively, asking questions that revealed genuine interest rather than judgment. When Isabella finally ran out of ranch stories, a comfortable silence fell between them. She gathered her courage to ask the question that had been forming since her conversation with Grace. "Dad, why did you really send me here?" Harrison's sigh carried through the phone line. "Because I saw myself failing you in the most fundamental way a parent can. I was giving you everything except what you actually needed." "Which is what?" Isabella prompted when he didn't continue. "The chance to discover your own strength," Harrison replied. "To learn that true satisfaction comes from contribution, not consumption. To find purpose beyond the privileges you were born into." His words resonated with truths Isabella had been reluctantly discovering during her time at Clearwater. "I was pretty awful, wasn't I?" she admitted, thinking of her behavior at the birthday party and countless similar instances. "You were lost," Harrison corrected gently, "and that was largely my fault. After your mother died, I threw myself into building the company, convincing myself I was securing your future, but I was also avoiding the harder work of being present, of helping you develop character rather than just providing comfort." The raw honesty of his self-assessment caught Isabella off guard. This vulnerable side of her father was entirely new to her, or perhaps it had always been there, hidden beneath the successful businessman persona they both found easier to maintain. "I think I understand why you sent me here now," Isabella said, slowly, "and I'm not angry anymore. Well, not as angry, anyway." Harrison's chuckle carried a hint of relief. "That's progress. How much longer do you think you'll stay?" The question gave her pause. Her initial assumption had been that she would leave Clearwater at the first opportunity, returning to her comfortable Manhattan existence with relief. Now, the prospect of leaving felt strangely unsettling. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "There's still a lot to learn here, and I made a commitment to the Callahans." "Take the time you need," Harrison said. "The company, the apartment, New York, it's all still here, but this chance to discover who you are beyond all that, that's valuable in ways I think you're beginning to understand." After saying goodbye, Isabella remained on the porch, watching stars appear in the vast Montana sky. The conversation with her father had shifted something fundamental in her perception of both him and herself. For the first time, she could see Harrison not just as the source of her privilege or the enforcer of unwelcome discipline, but as a person struggling with his own imperfections, trying in his flawed way to do right by his child. The screen door creaked as Jack stepped onto the porch, a mug of coffee in his weathered hands. "Mind some company?" Isabella gestured to the empty space beside her on the swing. "Not at all." Jack settled beside her, his solid presence comfortable in the gathering darkness. Talk to your father? News travels fast around here. Isabella observed without real irritation. Small communities, Jack replied with a slight smile. Not much stays private for long. Good conversation? Better than I expected, Isabella admitted. Different. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the gentle creaking of the swing and the night creatures beginning their chorus. Jack, Isabella began hesitantly, how well do you really know my father? Jack gazed thoughtfully at the darkening sky before answering. Well enough to call him a friend, though our worlds are very different. We met about 15 years ago when he was looking to source ethically raised beef for Thorne Innovations' corporate retreats. Most suppliers saw a rich man they could overcharge, but your father saw right through that. He appreciated our straightforward approach. That sounds like him, Isabella acknowledged. He's always had a radar for people trying to take advantage. Harrison visits the ranch a couple times a year, Jack continued. Says it helps clear his head. We ride the property, talk business sometimes, but mostly about family, about what matters beyond the bottom line. He paused, sipping his coffee. He speaks of you often, with pride, but also worry. Isabella absorbed this unexpected glimpse into another side of her father, a man who apparently valued this simple ranch and its honest work enough to return regularly, who discussed his daughter with people who had now become central to her own experience. The night your mother died, Jack said quietly, Harrison called me. It was 3 a.m. here, but he needed someone to talk to who wasn't part of your New York circle. Someone who'd understand the raw pain of it. Isabella stiffened. Her father never spoke about the night her mother died. Why would he call you specifically? Because I lost my first wife when Liam was just a baby, Jack replied simply. Harrison knew I'd understand what he was facing, raising a child alone while grieving yourself. This revelation struck Isabella with the force of physical pain. She'd never known Jack had been married before Grace, never considered that Liam might not be Grace's biological son. Your father was terrified, Jack continued. Not of the business challenges or practical matters. He knew he could handle those. He was afraid of failing you emotionally, of not being able to give you what Elizabeth would have provided. A memory surfaced from Isabella's childhood, finding her father in his study late one night, a photograph of her mother in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She'd retreated without making her presence known, uncomfortable with this display of vulnerability from her normally composed parent. The next morning, Harrison had been his usual efficient self, the moment of grief carefully tucked away. I think he did fail me, Isabella admitted softly, but not in the way he feared. He gave me everything except limits, boundaries, consequences. He wanted me to be happy so badly that he forgot to teach me how to be good. Jack nodded, understanding, in his weathered face. It's the hardest balance to strike as a parent, knowing when to shelter your child and when to let them face the harsher truths of life. Your father erred on the side of protection, given what you'd already lost. It's hard to blame him. Isabella considered this perspective, so different from her previous view of Harrison as simply an indulgent parent who had spoiled her out of carelessness or distraction. The important thing, Jack added, is that he recognized his mistake before. It was too late. Sending you here took courage. He knew you'd hate him for it, at least initially. I did, Isabella confirmed with a rueful smile. I was planning elaborate revenge scenarios, the entire flight to Montana. Jack chuckled. "I suspected as much from your expression when I picked you up. You looked like you were considering whether I'd fit in a shallow grave." Isabella laughed, surprised by how easy it felt to acknowledge her former attitude. "You must have thought I was a complete monster." "I thought you were a young woman who had never been given the chance to discover her own strength," Jack corrected. "There's a difference." The simple validation in his words warmed something deep within Isabella. Jack Callahan's respect wasn't given freely. It had to be earned, and somewhere along the way it seemed she had begun to do just that. "Get some rest," Jack advised, rising from the swing. "Tomorrow's cattle rotation day. We'll need all hands, even those attached to formerly sprained ankles." After he left, Isabella remained on the porch, watching the stars multiply across the vast Montana sky. For the first time since arriving at Clearwater, she felt a sense of genuine belonging, not just tolerance of her presence, but actual acceptance. Into this family and their way of life, the cattle rotation proved to be Isabella's most challenging assignment yet. The task involved moving a herd of several hundred cattle from one grazing area to another, a complex operation requiring coordination, timing, and horseback skills she was still developing. "You'll ride sweep with me," Liam instructed at breakfast. Using terminology she now understood meant they would bring up the rear of the herd, keeping stragglers moving in the right direction. "Buttercup knows the drill, even if you don't, so follow my lead and you'll be fine." Despite this reassurance, Isabella felt a flutter of nervousness as she saddled Buttercup. The mare sensed her tension, tossing her head restlessly until Isabella forced herself to calm down, using the breathing techniques Emma had taught her. "Talk to her," Emma advised, passing by with her own mount. "Horses respond to your voice, especially when they trust you." Isabella stroked Buttercup's neck, murmuring reassurances that gradually steadied them both. By the time they rode out to join the others, she felt a cautious confidence in their ability to handle the day's work together. The cattle drive began smoothly, the experienced ranch hands positioned strategically around the herd. Jack and Emma took the lead positions, setting the pace and direction. Several workers Isabella had come to know over the past weeks managed the flanks, while she and Liam brought up the rear. The coordination was impressive, a choreographed dance between humans, horses and cattle moving across the landscape. Isabella found herself caught up in the rhythm of it, responding to Liam's subtle signals, guiding Buttercup with growing confidence to turn straying cattle back toward the main herd. "You're getting the hang of it," Liam called over the sound, "of lowing cattle and thundering hooves. Natural instinct for this." The compliment, delivered without fanfare, meant more coming from Liam than it might have from others. The eldest Callahan child was sparing with praise, making his approval all the more valuable when offered. 3 hours into the drive, as they approached a narrow passage between two hillsides, the carefully orchestrated movement began to falter. A young steer at the edge of the herd took fright at something, perhaps a snake or sudden movement in the underbrush, and bolted, causing nearby cattle to scatter in response. "Cut them off before they reach the trees," Liam shouted, already urging his horse toward one flank of the breakaway group. Isabella reacted instinctively, guiding Buttercup in a wide arc to intercept the cattle from the opposite direction. The maneuver required speed and precision, qualities she would have believed beyond her abilities just weeks ago. Now She moved with surprising confidence, working in tandem with her horse to redirect the wayward animals the escaped cattle faced, with riders approaching from both sides, hesitated just long enough for Liam and Isabella to establish control. Gradually, they guided the small group back toward the main herd, which Jack and the others had managed to keep moving forward at a reduced pace. "Quick thinking," Jack acknowledged when they rejoined the drive. "You're developing good instincts, Isabella." By late afternoon, they had successfully relocated the entire herd to the fresh grazing area, lush pasture watered by a tributary of the main river. Isabella watched with satisfaction as the cattle spread out across the verdant landscape, already beginning to graze. "How do you feel?" Emma asked, as they dismounted near the temporary camp the ranch hands had established for those staying overnight to monitor the herd's adjustment to their new location. Isabella considered the question as she unsaddled Buttercup, her muscles aching pleasantly from the day's exertion. Tired. Sore. She smiled, surprising herself with the realization. Happy. That night, Isabella joined the small group remaining at the campsite, Jack, Liam, and 2 ranch hands named Miguel and David. They gathered around a campfire, eating a simple but hearty meal of beans, beef, and cornbread cooked in cast iron. Over the open flame, the conversation flowed easily, touching on practical matters of ranch management, humorous stories of previous cattle drives, and quiet observations about the beauty of their surroundings. Isabella found herself not just included but actively engaged, offering opinions and asking questions that were received with thoughtful consideration rather than condescension. As night deepened and stars crowded the sky in numbers unimaginable. In Manhattan, Isabella wrapped herself in a borrowed blanket, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and sage. The men began to trade stories, tall tales and true ones, blending together in the time-honored tradition of people who worked the land. "Your turn, city girl," Miguel prompted when a comfortable lull fell. "Tell us something about your world." Isabella hesitated, unsure what aspect of her previous life might interest these men who measured wealth in different terms than dollars. "I don't have adventure stories like yours," she admitted. "Everyone has stories," Jack encouraged. "They just take different forms." After a moment's thought, Isabella began to speak about her college years, not the parties and shopping expeditions she'd once considered the highlights, but the moments of genuine connection and discovery that had occurred despite her then priorities. She described a literature professor who had challenged her comfortable assumptions, a late-night conversation with a scholarship student that had briefly opened her eyes to economic realities different from her own, a volunteer day at a community garden that had sparked an interest she'd never pursued. The men listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that suggested real interest rather than mere politeness. Isabella found herself sharing thoughts and observations she'd never articulated before, perspectives that had been forming unconsciously during her time at Clearwater. "Sounds like you've been on your own journey of discovery," Jack commented when she finally fell silent. "Just on different terrain." The simple validation warmed her more than the campfire. "I think I lost my way for a while," she acknowledged. "Got caught up in appearances, in what other people expected of a Thorne." "And now?" Liam asked, his expression thoughtful in the flickering light. Isabella gazed up at the star-filled sky, considering the question. "Now I'm beginning to wonder who I might be without all that, who Isabella is underneath the name and the money and the expectations." That, Jack said quietly, is exactly the question your father hoped you'd start asking. The next morning, as they rode back to the main ranch, Isabella found herself alongside Jack, the two of them bringing up the rear, while Liam and the others led the way. I've been thinking about returning to New York, she said after they'd ridden. In comfortable silence for some time, Jack nodded, his expression neutral. Missing the city? Not exactly. Isabella was surprised to realize this was true. But I need to face my father in person, thank him, maybe apologize too. Sounds reasonable, Jack agreed. When are you thinking? Not immediately, Isabella clarified quickly. There's still the harvest to help with, and I promised Grace I'd learn canning before I left. But soon, I think. A short trip just to clear the air, maybe collect some things I'd want to have here. She hadn't planned that last part, but as the words emerged, Isabella realized they reflected a truth she'd been gradually acknowledging. She wasn't ready to leave Clearwater permanently, not yet. There was still too much to learn, too much growth happening, that she was reluctant to interrupt. Jack seemed to understand the significance of what she was expressing. You're welcome here as long as you want to stay, he said simply. You've earned your place. The words, understated in typical Callahan fashion, carried profound meaning. Isabella had earned her place, not through her father's wealth or influence, not through her family name, but through her own efforts, her willingness to learn, her growing contribution to the ranch's daily functioning. 2 days later, Isabella called her father again, this time with a specific purpose. I'd like to come to New York for a few days, she said after they'd exchanged greetings. Not permanently, she added quickly, hearing his sharp intake of breath. Just to talk, face to face. Of course, Harrison replied, and she could hear the carefully controlled hope in his voice. Whenever you're ready, the penthouse is yours, always. Actually, Isabella said, I was hoping you might meet me somewhere else. Neutral territory, maybe. There's a cafe near Central Park where Mum used to take me for hot chocolate. Do you remember it? There was a moment of silence before Harrison answered, his voice suddenly thick with emotion. Madeline's, on 82nd Street. Elizabeth loved their almond croissants. That's the one, Isabella confirmed, touched that he remembered this small detail. Could we meet there when I come? I'd like that very much, Harrison said quietly. The arrangements were made quickly. Isabella would fly to New York the following week, stay for 3 days, and return to Montana. Jack offered the use of the ranch's small plane and pilot for the journey, a gesture that reflected both the Callahans' growing attachment to her and their understanding of the importance of this reconciliation. As the day of departure approached, Isabella found herself both anticipating and dreading the return to Manhattan. Would the city feel as foreign to her as the ranch once had? Would she be tempted back into old patterns and perspectives? How would she reconcile the person she was, becoming with the world she had left behind? The evening before her flight, she sat with Emma on the porch swing, watching a spectacular sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Nervous about tomorrow? Emma asked, somehow intuiting Isabella's internal tumult as she so often did. A little, Isabella admitted. It feels strange going back, even temporarily. Like I'm two different people now, and I'm not sure how they fit together. Emma considered this. Maybe you don't need to make them fit perfectly. Maybe it's okay to be evolving, to take the best parts of both worlds and create something new. When did you get so wise? Isabella teased, though the words resonated deeply. Comes with the territory, Emma replied with a grin. You spend enough time observing nature, you start to understand that growth rarely happens in straight lines. It's messy, unpredictable, but necessary. Isabella thought about the transformations she'd witnessed during her time at Clearwater. Seeds becoming plants, foals growing steadily stronger, landscapes shifting with the seasons. Her own changes felt part of that same natural process, organic, rather than forced. I'm coming back, she said, feeling the need to articulate this commitment aloud. Whatever happens in New York, I'm not done here yet. I know, Emma said simply, her confidence in this outcome apparently absolute. You've found something here worth returning to. Isabella's first glimpse of the Manhattan skyline from the small plane's window stirred a complex mix of emotions. The familiar steel and glass towers rising against the horizon had once represented her entire world. Now they seemed simultaneously intimately familiar and strangely remote, like revisiting a childhood home as an adult and finding everything both exactly as remembered and somehow diminished. The private airfield in New Jersey where they landed was a compromise Isabella had suggested, avoiding the media attention that might accompany her arrival at one of the major airports while still providing convenient access to the city. Harrison had offered to send a car, but Isabella had declined, preferring to arrange her own transportation, another small assertion of her growing independence. The taxi ride into Manhattan provided a gradual re-immersion into urban rhythms. The driver navigated through increasing traffic density, pedestrians crowding sidewalks, the sensory overload of advertisements, store displays, and construction scaffolding. After months of Montana's vast, open spaces and natural quiet, the city's concentrated energy felt almost overwhelming. Isabella had booked a hotel room rather than staying at the penthouse, another deliberate choice to maintain perspective during this visit. The boutique hotel in Soho was luxurious by most standards, but modest compared to her former lifestyle. As she unpacked the few items she'd brought, mostly practical clothes acquired in Montana with just one designer outfit for specific occasions, Isabella reflected on how her definition of necessity had shifted during her time at Clearwater. That evening, she ventured out for a solitary dinner at a small Italian restaurant she'd frequented in her previous life. The maitre d' recognized her immediately, his eyes widening slightly at her changed appearance, the sun-kissed skin, the calloused hands, the simplified hairstyle. "Miss Thorne, what a pleasure to see you again. Your usual table?" Isabella nodded, sliding into the familiar corner booth with its view of the bustling restaurant and street beyond. The menu offerings, once the center of her attention, now seemed secondary to her observation of the patrons around her. Young professionals hunched over their phones between bites, couples engaged in intensity or indifference, business associates performing careful social calculations across white tablecloths. Had she once been so absorbed in appearances, so disconnected from the substance beneath the performance? The question wasn't entirely fair. New York operated by different rules than Clearwater Ranch, requiring its own form of adaptations. Yet Isabella couldn't help noting the contrast between the genuine, straightforward interactions she'd grown accustomed to in Montana and the elaborate social choreography playing out around her. "Would you care for wine this evening?" the waiter inquired, his professional smile revealing nothing of what he might think about her transformed appearance. Isabella hesitated, then shook her head. "Just sparkling water, thank you. I have an important meeting tomorrow. The simple pasta dish she ordered tasted different somehow, the flavors both more intense and less satisfying than she remembered. Isabella ate slowly, observing her surroundings with the perspective of someone simultaneously insider and outsider, belonging to this world, yet viewing it through a lens permanently altered by her time away. When her phone chimed with an incoming message, she was surprised to feel a pang of homesickness at the sight of Emma's name on the screen. The photo that followed showed Buttercup with her head hanging over her stall door, accompanied by a simple text. "Someone misses you already." Isabella smiled, typing back, "Tell her I miss her too, both of you. How was the North Pasture fencing project?" The ensuing exchange about mundane ranch matters provided an unexpected anchor, a reminder of the connection she'd formed and the person she was becoming. By the time she returned to her hotel, Isabella felt more centered, more prepared for the pivotal meeting awaiting her the next day. Madeline's Cafe hadn't changed in the years since Isabella had last visited. The same cheerful yellow awning shaded the entrance, the same glass case displayed an array of pastries, and the same comforting aroma of coffee and baked goods enveloped customers as they entered. Isabella arrived 15 minutes early, deliberately choosing a table in the back corner, the very spot where she and her mother had often sat during their special outings. The memory was hazy but persistent. Elizabeth Thorne's elegant hands, cradling a cappuccino cup, her patient smile as Isabella deliberated between hot chocolate with or without whipped cream, their quiet conversations about books and dreams and the small adventures of childhood. Isabella had been only 5 when her mother died, yet these cafe visits remained among her most vivid recollections. Harrison arrived precisely on time, pausing at the entrance to scan the room. When his gaze found Isabella, something flickered across his features. Recognition, surprise, and perhaps a touch of uncertainty. He looked older than she remembered, the silver at his temples more pronounced, fine lines etched more deeply around his eyes. Yet he moved with the same purposeful confidence, navigating between tables with the ease of someone accustomed to commanding space. Isabella. He stopped at her table, his expression carefully controlled, yet unable to conceal the emotion beneath. "You look different," she supplied when he hesitated. "Wonderful," Harrison completed. "Healthy, strong." He remained standing, as if uncertain of his welcome. Isabella gestured to the chair opposite her. "Please sit. I've already ordered. For us both. I hope you still take your coffee black." "Some habits never change," Harrison confirmed, settling into the chair with a hint of his usual precision. His gaze remained on her face, cataloguing the subtle transformations of the past. "Months. Montana agrees with you." "It does," Isabella acknowledged, surprising herself with how readily she admitted this, though I wasn't convinced at first. Their order arrived. Black coffee for Harrison, hot chocolate with whipped cream for Isabella, and a plate of almond. Croissants between them. The familiar ritual created a bridge between past and present, between the motherless child Isabella had been and the woman she was becoming. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Harrison said after taking a sip of his coffee. "When Jack first called about arranging the flight, I thought perhaps that I'd changed my mind," Isabella completed. "I considered it. This feels complicated. Being back, seeing you." Harrison nodded, accepting her honesty without defense. "I imagine it would be. You left under difficult circumstances. I left under your orders." Isabella corrected, though without the bitterness that would once have accompanied the words. With frozen credit cards and limited options. Yes, Harrison acknowledged, setting down his cup. I believed it was necessary. I still do, though I regret the pain it caused you. Isabella broke off a piece of croissant, considering her response. I was furious at first, humiliated, convinced you were punishing me out of some twisted power. Play. She met his gaze directly. But you were right. I needed the wake-up call. Something eased in Harrison's posture, a tension he'd carried for so long it had become part of his bearing. The Callahans have been good for you. They've been honest with me, Isabella replied, which is something I've rarely experienced. People have always treated me differently because of who you are, because of our wealth. At Clearwater, none of that matters. I'm judged solely on what I contribute, on who I choose to be each day. Harrison's expression softened with both pride and regret. That's all I've ever wanted for you, the chance to discover your own value, separate from the Thorne name and fortune. I just didn't know how to provide that opportunity within the world we inhabit. So you sent me to a completely different world instead, Isabella observed, a hint of humor softening the observation. It seemed the most efficient solution, Harrison replied with a self-deprecating smile that reminded Isabella, suddenly and forcefully, of Liam's rare but transformative grins. I've always been accused of thinking too much like a CEO, even with your daughter, especially with my daughter. The admission carried the weight of long self-examination. After your mother died, I retreated into familiar territory, problem-solving, resource allocation, strategic planning. I applied business principles to parenting because they were the tools I trusted. Isabella considered this perspective, seeing her childhood through a new lens. The extravagant gifts, the freedom from consequences, the staff hired to manage practical matters, all could be viewed as her father's attempt to optimize her happiness through the methods he understood best. I think, she said carefully, we both got lost somewhere along the way. You in trying to compensate for Mum's absence, me in taking advantage of that to avoid growing up. Harrison reached across the table, hesitating before covering her hand with his own. I've missed you, Isabella. Not just these past months, but for years before that. Even when you were physically present, it felt like you were slipping away, becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone I feared you wouldn't like either, once you gained enough perspective to see clearly. The simple admission struck deeper than any lecture or criticism could have. Isabella turned her hand beneath his, returning the grasp with equal pressure. I'm starting to like who I am at Clearwater, she admitted. The person I'm becoming there feels real, solid. Tell me about this person, Harrison invited, genuine interest replacing the wariness that had initially characterized his expression. And so she did. Over the next 2 hours, as their coffee was replenished and additional pastries arrived, Isabella shared her experiences at the ranch, the initial culture shock, the physical challenges, the gradual awakening to different values and perspectives. She described feeding orphaned calves, helping birth Serene, learning to ride Buttercup, the satisfaction of bringing vegetables she'd helped grow to the farmer's market. Harrison listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking questions that revealed his familiarity with Clearwater's operations, but never interrupting the flow of her narrative. When Isabella finally fell silent, the cafe had emptied of its morning rush, leaving them in relative privacy. You've changed, Harrison, observed quietly. It's not just the physical differences, though those are apparent too. There's a centeredness to you now, a clarity I haven't seen before. I'm learning who I am when stripped of all the external markers I used to hide behind, Isabella replied. When designer labels and exclusive reservations and social connections don't matter, what's left is just me. The good and the bad, the strengths and the weaknesses, all of it authentic in a way I wasn't prepared for. And this authenticity, it suits you, Harrison said, pride evident in his voice. Most days, Isabella acknowledged with a small smile. Some days it's terrifying, being responsible for my own value rather than borrowing it from circumstances I was born into. Harrison nodded, understanding in his expression. That's a lesson I learned much earlier in life, out of necessity rather than choice. Building something from nothing. It changes how you see yourself, how you measure worth. You never talk. About that time, Isabella observed. Your life before Thorne Innovations, before the wealth. I realized recently how little I actually know about your journey. Something shifted in Harrison's expression. An opening, an invitation to deeper understanding. Perhaps it's time I shared more of that history with you. Not as lectures or cautionary tales, but as the experiences that shaped the father you got. For better or worse. I'd like that, Isabella said softly. They left Madeleine's by mutual agreement, deciding to walk through Central Park as they continued their conversation. The September day was perfect for strolling. Warm sunshine tempered by a hint of autumn crispness, trees just beginning to consider changing their summer wardrobes for more dramatic fall attire. As they walked, Harrison spoke of his own youth, growing up in a small Pennsylvania town, the son of a factory worker and a school secretary. He described the scholarship that had provided his ticket to college, the night security job that had paid his living expenses, the combination of talent and relentless work that had opened doors initially closed to someone of his background. The first time I could afford to buy new clothes rather than second-hand, I went slightly overboard, he admitted with a self-conscious smile. 3 suits, all nearly identical, except for minor details only I would notice. I was so proud of them, so certain they would transform how people perceived me. Did they? Isabella asked, fascinated by this glimpse of her father as a young man navigating social stratification, not unlike what she was experiencing in reverse. To an extent, Harrison acknowledged. Appearance matters in business circles, particularly when you're starting out with no connections or family name to smooth your path. But those suits didn't actually change anything fundamental about who I was or what I could contribute. They paused beside the lake, watching model sailboats navigate the placid water under the direction of their enthusiastic captains. The simple pleasure of these boat owners, many of them retirees with time to pursue hobbies, struck Isabella as representative of something essential she was learning. Joy derived from engagement rather than acquisition. Your mother understood that distinction instinctively, Harrison continued, his gaze on the boats but his thoughts clearly elsewhere. She came from privilege but wore it lightly, valuing experiences over possessions, connections over transactions. I was drawn to that, a quality in her. The genuine interest she took in people, regardless of their status or utility to her ambitions. Isabella had heard so little about her mother over the years, Harrison's grief having sealed away most memories behind a wall of protective silence. Now she hungered for these insights into the woman who had helped shape her earliest years. What else? She prompted gently. What else was she like? Harrison's smile held both joy and sorrow, the complex legacy of a love ended too soon. She was passionate about literature. Her degree was in English, and she volunteered teaching adult literacy classes even after we could afford for her not to work. She had a laugh that started quietly and built until it was impossible not to join in. Even if you hadn't heard the original joke, she could be stubborn about matters of principle, but surprisingly flexible about practical details. He turned to Isabella, his expression softening. She would be incredibly proud of the woman you're becoming. This journey you're on, discovering your own strength, your own purpose, it would have delighted her. The simple validation, offered without calculation or agenda, touched something deep within Isabella. Most of her life had been spent trying to fill the absence left by her mother's death, attempting to compensate through external validation and material acquisition. The possibility that Elizabeth Thorne might have valued precisely the qualities Isabella was now developing at Clearwater felt like the closing of a long open circle. Their walk through Central Park stretched into the afternoon as father and daughter navigated the complex terrain of their relationship with newfound honesty. When they finally parted, Isabella to her hotel, Harrison to a business meeting he couldn't reschedule, both felt the subtle shift that had occurred between them, a foundation being carefully rebuilt on stronger principles. The remaining 2 days of Isabella's New York visit passed quickly. She met with her father again for dinner, this time at a small restaurant Harrison had frequented during his early business days. Another piece of history shared, rather than concealed. They discussed practical matters, her continued stay at Clearwater, financial arrangements that would support her independence without enabling a return to previous excesses, the possibility of university courses that might complement the practical education she was receiving at the ranch. Isabella also carved out time to visit her old apartment, sorting through possessions with fresh eyes. The closets full of barely worn designer clothing now seemed excessive rather than essential. She selected a few practical items to bring back to Montana and arranged for the remainder to be donated to a women's workforce development program. Suits and business attire that might help others secure their own fresh starts. Most revealing was her reunion with 3 friends from her former social circle. Over lunch at what had once been their favorite exclusive spot, Isabella observed the familiar rhythms of their conversation. Celebrity gossip, social slights, competition thinly veiled as compliments. With the detachment of an anthropologist studying an unfamiliar culture, these women had once been her closest confidants, yet sitting with them now, Isabella felt the vast distance her internal journey had created. "Montana must be absolutely dreadful," remarked Alessandra, wrinkling her perfect nose at the very thought. "All that nature, and the people must be hopelessly provincial." "Actually," Isabella replied, surprised by the lack of defensiveness she felt, "it's been revelatory. The people are some of the most authentic I've ever met. There's an honesty there I've come to value. But what do you do all day?" Pressed Madison, genuine bewilderment in her expression. "There can't be any decent shopping, and I looked up this Timberline place online. They don't even have a proper restaurant." Isabella considered how to translate her experiences into terms these women might comprehend. "I've been learning how businesses actually operate from the ground up. Agriculture, animal husbandry, direct-to-consumer marketing. Skills that translate to any enterprise." Her friends exchanged glances that mixed confusion with concern, clearly interpreting her response as some form of Stockholm syndrome or temporary insanity. Isabella might have once reacted with irritation to their judgment, but now she felt only a gentle compassion for the limitations of their perspective. "Enough about my rustic adventure," she said, smoothly changing the subject. "Tell me what's been happening here." On her final evening in New York, Isabella and Harrison shared a quiet dinner at the penthouse. The familiar surroundings, once the only home she'd known, now felt like visiting a museum of her former life, each room containing artifacts of the person she had been, rather than the one she was becoming. "Will you be selling this place?" she asked as they sat in the living room afterward, the city lights twinkling beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. Harrison looked surprised by the question. "I hadn't planned to. It's your home, Isabella. It will always be here for you when you're ready to return." Isabella considered this, the automatic assumption that her Montana experience was merely a temporary detour from her predestined path. "I'm not sure I will return, Dad. Not to live, anyway. I'm finding something at Clearwater that I never found here." Instead of the resistance she half expected, Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "Purpose has a gravitational pull all its own," he observed. "It draws us toward places and people that reflect our deepest values, even when those differ from what we've always known." The insight revealed yet another dimension of this man she was truly getting to know for the first time, a philosopher beneath the businessman's exterior, capable of understanding journeys that diverged from his own experience. "That doesn't mean I'm abandoning you," Isabella clarified quickly, "or rejecting everything about this world, just finding my own path within it." Harrison's smile held both pride and a father's inevitable sadness at a child's growing independence. "That's exactly what you should be doing at your age. It's what I was doing when I started the company, though in a very different direction." The next morning, as Isabella prepared to board the small plane that would return her to Montana, Harrison embraced her with uncharacteristic demonstration, holding her tightly as if storing up the physical connection to sustain him through their separation. "This isn't goodbye," Isabella reminded him, returning the embrace with equal feeling. "Just until next time. I'm thinking of visiting Clearwater myself in a few weeks," Harrison said as they separated. "If that wouldn't disrupt your process." Isabella smiled, recognizing the careful way he was respecting her autonomy while still seeking connection. "I'd like that. The autumn colors will be spectacular by then, and there's someone I want you to meet." Harrison raised an eyebrow, parental curiosity evident. "Someone?" "Buttercup," Isabella clarified with a laugh. "My horse. She's teaching me patience and trust, one ride at a time." The flight back to Montana gave Isabella time to process the complex emotions of her visit. The strangeness of returning to a world that had once been her entire reality, the unexpected clarity she'd gained about both her father and herself, the growing certainty that her future would integrate elements of both worlds rather than choosing exclusively between them. As the plane began its descent, the Clearwater Valley came into view, autumn painting the landscape in rich golds and ambers. The ranch buildings looked impossibly small from this height, yet they represented something that had grown immeasurably significant in Isabella's life, a place of authentic connection, of meaningful work, of genuine growth. Jack waited beside, his truck at the airfield, his weathered face breaking into a smile as Isabella descended from the plane. "Welcome back," he said simply, helping her with her bag. "Good trip?" "Better than I expected," Isabella replied, breathing deeply of the crisp mountain air. Healing, I think, for both of us. Good, Jack nodded, satisfaction in his expression. The place wasn't the same without you. Emma's been insufferable without. Her kitchen helper, and Buttercup's been watching the driveway like a lovesick teenager. The casual inclusion, the assumption of her place within the ranch's daily rhythms, filled Isabella with quiet joy. As they drove along the familiar road toward Clearwater, she felt the tensions of New York falling away, replaced by a growing sense of homecoming. At the ranch, Emma waited on the porch, waving enthusiastically as the truck approached. Grace emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Even Liam appeared from the barn, offering a nod that, from him, constituted effusive welcome. "We were just about to start dinner," Grace announced as Isabella climbed the porch steps. "Your timing is perfect. I hope you're hungry. We're celebrating the first batch of preserves from the late harvest." "Starving," Isabella admitted, realizing it was true. Despite the excellent food available in New York, she had missed the simple, honest meals shared around the Callahan table, food connected directly to the land and the hands that tended it. Later, after recounting selected highlights of her trip, and helping with the dinner cleanup, Isabella made her way to the stables. Buttercup nickered softly as she approached, extending her velvet nose over the stall door in greeting. "I missed you too," Isabella murmured, stroking the mare's neck. "New York has many things, but nothing quite like you." As she stood there in the quiet stable, the sense of hay and horse familiar and comforting, Isabella reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Her father's reset had begun as punishment in her mind, a cruel removal of everything she valued. Now she recognized it as the gift it truly was, the opportunity to discover her authentic self beyond the artificial constraints of privilege and expectation. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear. She still had much to learn, both at Clearwater and eventually beyond it. Yet for perhaps the first time in her life, Isabella felt genuinely excited about that uncertainty, about the person she was becoming with each choice, each effort, each day lived with intention rather than entitlement. Outside, the Montana twilight painted the mountains in deepening shades of purple and blue. Isabella emerged from the stable to find Emma waiting, 2 mugs of steaming cider in her hands. "Thought you might want this," Emma offered, extending one of the mugs, first pressing from the orchard harvest, Jack's secret recipe. Isabella accepted the mug gratefully, inhaling the spiced aroma. Together, they walked to their favorite spot at the edge of the property, where the view of the valley opened up in panoramic splendor. "So," Emma asked after they'd sipped their cider in companionable silence, "did you find what you were looking for in New York?" Isabella considered the question, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I think," she said finally, "I found that what I've been looking for has been here all along. What happens when privilege meets purpose? When someone, raised with everything, is suddenly forced to earn their place in the world?" Isabella's journey from spoiled heiress to a young woman discovering her true strengths reminds us that sometimes the greatest gift we can receive is the chance to find our own way. If this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more tales of transformation and redemption. Share in the comments how someone in your life helped you discover your own potential. Sometimes the toughest love leaves the deepest impact. And join us tomorrow for the story of a teacher who changed an entire community by believing in the child everyone else had given up on. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single moment of inspiration.